Okay, hello and welcome to the Lockdown Outlook with Steve McGowan, brought to you by Maverick Insiders and sponsored by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. My name is Tudor Caradoc-Davies and I'm a freelance editor and writer. My previous engagement with the wonderful motley crew at the Daily Maverick was on the We Have a Game Changer book, which we put out last year. I helped write that. If you haven't read it, please do. It's a goodie. I'm now helping Steve with his book, which will be published by the Daily Maverick's book publishing wing, which is Maverick 451. Maverick 451 is quite a special little animal in that it aims to change the way that books are created and consumed. Steve's book is the first external book to come out of the Maverick 451 stable. And having spent a fair amount of time interviewing Steve over the last few weeks, I can tell you it's going to be a goodie. Just a quick aside, the title of Steve's book is still to be decided, and we would like you to weigh in on that during the course of this webinar by taking our poll. We actually sent it out last night and got over 200 responses in no time. And one of the options you'll see in the poll actually came from a Maverick insider who didn't like the other options and came up with a great one himself. So that's Maverick 451 at work, involving you in these things. Although, you know, the ultimate decision will probably rest with us. Right, that's the hors d'oeuvres over. Onto the main course. The clean-cut chap you see over there is Steve McGowan. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Tito. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me today. This is very exciting, I must say.
So Steve holds the unenviable record as al-Qaeda's longest held prisoner after enduring 6 years in the Sahara Desert. I don't know if he's had it verified by the Guinness Book of Records yet, but I don't think anyone comes close to that. And not only did Steve survive his incarceration in the middle of nowhere, but 2 weeks ago he almost killed himself on his mountain bike, which is why this webinar was pushed back 2 weeks. So it's great. It's great to see him in one piece, although he is wearing his sling. Just a little bit of background around how Steve landed up as a prisoner of al-Qaeda. After working in the UK as a banker, Steve and his wife Kath decided to move back to South Africa, and Steve wanted to take the scenic route by riding his motorbike all the way from the UK down the west coast of Africa back to Joburg. And along the way, he was kidnapped in Timbuktu with a Swedish guy and a Dutch guy, and they were whisked off deep into the desert. So that's kind of how he landed up there. Steve, for most people on the planet, 2020 has been probably the weirdest year ever. I mean, the pandemic hit. There's obviously the death, the disease, economic fallout, job losses, and the loss of our liberties, which is the thing that everybody has in common here. If it were a game of one-upmanship, you would win because you had the weirdest or strangest decade ever. Not only banking in London, I feel sorry for you there, but you were also held by al-Qaeda for a full 6 years, and then you spent a couple of years reintegrating back into society. I imagine you have a perspective that's quite different to the rest of us on all these changes. How, you know, since lockdown happened in late March, how have you coped with everything?
Thanks, Tito. So lockdown's actually been all right, I must say. For my wife and I, what are we now, 3 months, 4 months into this thing? I suppose it's a lot to do with perspective. And, you know, if we were all 6 years down the line, looking back at the first 3 months or the first 4 months, we would also think that it hasn't been too bad, actually. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes to our lifestyle, but I must say there's been a lot of good in the change, I think, from a personal perspective. I think we generally run around too much and we're too busy and we stress ourselves out. And I know there's a lot of stress coming through now with COVID, but it's been quite something having to be more introspective and focus on your family and be home and actually focus on things that matter. I found during this lockdown time, probably people they have the same goal nowadays. They've got the same concerns, the same goal, which I think has really brought people together, which has been amazing, which I think is amazing because at the end of the day, I believe everything in life is really about people. There've been some strange events, which I've noticed, going shopping. there are a lot of very angry people out there at the moment. People who will frown and sort of frown and get a serious look at you if you were in the shops and you were buying something and you saw somebody who you knew and you took your social distancing. You were 4 or 5 meters away with your mask on, and if you happen to say, "Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you for a while," no doubt there'll be someone in the other aisle who will walk past you and give you a big scolding look, thinking that the virus can be caught by being friendly or being, or smiling or being happy, which has been a bit strange, because I think this lockdown time really is so much about our attitude, and this is probably what I learned most in the desert was it's these tough times that you probably learn the most about yourself, and it's these tough times that really add value to the good times in the future. If we don't use these tough times now, we really are actually wasting our lives, We really are wasting our lives. So my wife and I, it's been pretty easy. It's been good. We haven't had much work, so there is that side, which is obviously a big downer. But we've had more time together. We've had more time walking our dogs. The streets are empty, which is great. You can go for a walk without getting run over. Probably the biggest downside has been the park's been shut, and that's probably one of the things that we've battled with most: getting out in the afternoons and going for a walk with our dogs along the Spruit. But otherwise, like I say, it's all perspective, isn't it? I think everyone's got their own challenges and concerns, and it's about putting it into context, into the greater scheme of things.
Absolutely. You mentioned anger, when you're out shopping, and, when life-altering changes occur, people often refer to the Kubler-Ross stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When you were stuck in the desert, under guard, did you go through that entire range of emotions, or were there other things that came up for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually only heard of these 5 stages actually since my release. Prior to this, I'd never really, it was never an area that I sort of investigated. But I think I went through a number of them. I wouldn't say all of them. I mean, starting off with what was the first one? Denial. You say the first one's denial. I mean, it's. I was thrown into a very strange environment. I mean, if you just consider someone changing a job within a corporate, I heard once that it takes 6 months before you can actually become an asset to the company, because the first 6 months you're still learning the rope. Who's the guy in the corner? Just getting your head around how the business actually works. And this situation really was throwing me not between jobs; it was throwing me between worlds, if you like, because I mean, al-Qaeda used to refer to the Sahara as a akhir kokab. Akhir is another, kokab is like a planet. So they used to refer to it as another planet. And it literally was another planet. There was absolutely pretty much nothing that you could relate to there in the desert, except maybe the Land Cruiser. And beyond that, permanently AK-47s around you. I mean, just a sea of sand in every direction. I think there were 4 colors in the desert. There was literally the sky, which was blue, very blue. There was literally the sand, which was your yellows. There would often, in the rainy season, be a line of green. But besides that, there was absolute contrast between these things. And it was something which here in Joburg, whatever, you look around, you've got a neighbor next door, you've got a building or this, that. There was absolutely nothing there in the desert. In fact, in the early days, I used to, at night, I used to look towards the horizon. Every evening, look towards the horizon, hoping that I would be able to see some metropolis, see some light actually lighting up the horizon, lighting up clouds. And I suppose not really realizing that probably South Africa is one of the most developed countries in Africa. So the chance of there being any such light in Mali, a town in Mali creating such light, was impossible. And the fact that I was already 500 kilometers into the middle of nowhere, it's literally like sitting in Bloemfontein and looking for Joburg lights. So it was impossible. It was impossible. But really, it was so different from what I knew, from what my reality was, that it took me probably the better half of almost, I don't know, a year and a half before I started to actually say, right, I am kidnapped. So as far as denial goes, I mean, there were some very scary times in the early days where I did not think I would be surviving. And I mean, there were times I didn't think I'd survive the next 10 seconds. And so you really live numb quite a bit of the time. And I suppose numbness doesn't help to being able to sort of really experience your environment. And so the numbness added to my denial, I would say, in the beginning. But denial, most certainly I went through, and this was something which took quite a while. I think the next step was anger. And I don't really think I experienced anger. There was one moment that I remember. Well, okay, look, there's normal anger, like, someone broke something and now I'm cross. So that's what al-Qaeda would always do. They would always come and take whatever little stuff that I had and they would break it. And that would make me angry on a human level, that I'm angry. But to be angry with the environment, I'm not sure I actually ever went through that stage. And I would have no idea why I didn't. But there was one moment, actually, the day that I was kidnapped. We did a very long drive into the Sahara, and we stopped a number of times. But later on in the evening, we stopped. We were in the middle of nowhere, pitch black, just sand in every direction. I mean, sand going off into the darkness. And al-Qaeda started going through our pockets and confiscating things. And here goes a bit of dunya. Dunya in Arabic basically means the earth, everything below the moon, the earth and everything in it, all the gold, diamonds, all the trappings, all the things that we hold on to try and create a capitalistic, what is the word for when you just, not a very religious, when you just live in like a materialistic kind of lifestyle, a materialistic lifestyle. Right. So I bought a watch. I bought myself a watch. It was a Sunto. I was crawling around London trying to find this thing, and I went into great effort, and eventually I got the Sunto, and it was a nice big hiking watch, like an adventure watch, and it gave me a compass. It gave me storm warning, pressure, altitude, and I had this thing. This was going to be my little way of taking on adventure through Africa with my watch and being able to experience. And the guys confiscated it on that first night. They came up and they took it off my wrist, and it made me angry. It made me angry, and I think what got me was that they had taken, basically they had robbed everything from me at this particular moment. They had just taken my freedom. They had just taken my family. I had obligations back home. I had my wife coming home to start a new family, and they had stolen all of this. And ultimately, they then took my watch, which in my mind was the final straw. That in my mind, these guys had never done. If you looked at them, they really were sort of like a ragtag team of guys, and a lot of them were really scruffy. You could see that they hadn't come from a good home, or they weren't from the city. They were from the desert, and they didn't have much. And in my mind, I thought they had not worked a day in their lives. And I thought it is so easy just to sort of take someone and then rob them of their things. And it made me angry that they were taking from me. I felt sort of violated in a way that they had now taken. So that was probably my only anger that I really had with respect to being kidnapped, I suppose.
But there was also anger at the little book in your pocket, your British passport, and what it meant for you.
Oh, geez, yeah. So, I mean, I'd spent 7 years in the UK, and on my last 3 months there, my wife and I, we were naturalized, and we then became dual citizens. And, so I saw myself at that stage as being 35 years, 9 months South African, and then 3 months British South African. And they found this, and I mean, there was great joy from them. They obviously, the Brits, the Americans, the Israelis, the French are the most hated by al-Qaeda, and this put a lot of this was a big sword over my head, if you like, and this haunted me right from day one, right through to the end. And there was, I mean, from my side, I'm not so sure if there was anger at the book from my side. There was a lot of, maybe I wasted time and wasted money trying to get this thing, and now when I thought that this may have been opening up many doors, I wouldn't need visas, I wouldn't need anything else to go and travel the world. Well, now I had this big thing hanging over my head. The thing I'd spent time and money to get was now this big sword hanging over my head, and the most likely reason for me to be killed. Yeah. There were other times of anger. There were problems between us prisoners. And probably on that merit alone, we were 3 guys from 3 different countries, and I suppose we were 3 prisoners. You would have thought that we would have been a team. We would have been a group of guys fighting against the guys who took us, the guys who kidnapped us. And it didn't really work out that way. And I suppose, I used to swim. I used to be a swimmer, and swimming's not really a team sport, but I used to play rugby. But I've always put a lot of emphasis on friendships and relationships. And I would have expected us to have gotten along as 3 of us being on the same team. But what I didn't realize, what you don't realize before going into it, is that there would actually be a lot of competition as well. You're 3 people competing to get out of the desert. And with time, you start to have to rely on yourself more. And then you start to become more opinionated on what you believe. And you start to sort of brush up against each other. And as time goes by, you start to realize, you start to think that you're potentially never going home again. You won't go home. And then it takes you to some dark places. And, this was a huge thing, trying to maintain attitude. And we all, the three of us had different attitudes, different strategies and structures to get through this time in the desert. And this also certainly brushed up and got us to some bad places. But I mean, as far as anger within this situation goes, I don't think I had anger from a whole psychological point of view that of having my freedom taken from me, I think. Yeah. Then,
go for it.
Yeah, you want to say that what's the next thing? Bargaining. Bargaining and depression and acceptance. Bargaining is I think when you arrive in the desert, you start saying, well, I'm here because I did something bad, The big guy is obviously got something to teach me, and he's out with the wooden spoon and giving me a bit of a smack here. And obviously I've done bad things in my life, and that is why I've ended up here. And I think you go through this for quite a while, sort of beating yourself up, trying to actually figure out, I think this is all part of the process of trying to understand your situation. Because there's no point in beating yourself up. I mean, things happen. It's not like I did something bad and then I'm getting reprimanded from somebody else. It's not like that. But I think it's all part of trying to accept your situation. I suppose here within COVID, I mean, we probably all sit here and think, oh goodness, I made a bad business decision. I should have had more cash and less invested. But I mean, these are things that which we didn't actually contemplate prior to this. So bargaining.
It's impossible to forecast.
Yeah. Say that again. Sorry.
It's impossible to forecast that. It's, you would never have known it would happen.
The world is completely out of control, let me tell you. We think we're in control, but we're not in control. So, you've got to literally take it day by day and make your best decision and actually operate on that. And you can't beat yourself up after that. Probably the most important place of those 5 stages of grief is the acceptance stage. Because it's only when you actually, everything prior to that is to try and make sense of your situation. And these are all the crazy things that go on in our head. But once you've actually decided, well, this is where I'm at, I can change it or I can't change it. And then you actually realize, well, you must change what you can, but you must accept what you can't. It's only then that you actually start to move forward, and you can actually start to get a grip of yourself and actually start to get a grip of your situation and be able to create things. Then you can make a decision where you want to go. And once you've made a decision, without making a decision in life, you don't go anywhere. But once you've accepted your situation, you can make a decision, and then you can start moving forward again. And that's what I found in the desert. And it took a while, but it's also important to remember, I didn't study this. Okay, I never asked to be kidnapped. It wasn't like I'm some guy who's going to sort of go to the moon or climb some mountain or do some other crazy stuff. I didn't prepare to be kidnapped. I didn't do kidnapping 101 at varsity. I was never in the military. I didn't learn how to use a gun. I don't know how far a guy can walk with 5 liters of water. I didn't prep. And going into the desert was like going back in time 2,000 years, where birds would land on my head. I'd feed crickets to birds in my hut out of my hand. It was going back in time. So everything from there in the desert was basically me recreating the wheel. So everything I'm talking today, look, I'm not a professional. I didn't study this. So I am giving you a story that was experienced. And this is what I learned from the situation.
Amazing. Steve, we've got a question from Cecilia Serenata about what are the things that got you through each day. Was it a case of dealing with each day on its own, or did you take a longer term view? And I've also wanted to know, at the moment, we're all becoming amateur bakers or gardeners or home fitness fanatics. And I guess it's our need for stimulation and structure and routine, because gyms and restaurants and all those kinds of things in the normal world are no longer available. So did you develop routines in the deserts? And what did an average day look like?
I tell you, routine is imperative, because routine gives you a sense of control. I mean, even though it might not be a sense of control, it might be something completely not related to your situation, but routine gives you something that you as a person can have control over, and that becomes your little world, and you really do seek a lot of comfort in that. And but then at the same time, I didn't want to sort of turn my back on change, because, to be a complete person, you've got to accept change and you've got to sort of accept routine. You want to be able to sort of find value in both of those things. And change in the beginning, I found very scary, because change would always potentially bring somebody else into the camp who would be somebody who was of seniority and somebody who was coming with the order to chop my head off or something like that, or changing camps, potentially be going somewhere where I'm going to be killed. But I learned with time that actually change, there's a lot of good in change, because when we did change camps and things, we would get people who would come and give us information, and there would be opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity in change. So we mustn't be scared of change. But routine is important, because, I mean, I certainly got into routine, there was a time in the desert within the first year that I converted to Islam. And then our routine changed from our routine prior to conversion. But once I converted to Islam, our entire day revolved around the 5 prayers of the day. And it would be pretty much, you would wake up in the morning, you would do your prayer, you would then get up, have breakfast, you would then recite the Quran, you would then maybe have a sleep mid-morning. I built my hut in the shape of a gym. So, because it was too hot to do exercise outside. So every morning at around 10 o'clock, I used to do my sort of half-hour gym, half-hour kind of thing. And I would be in my hut, and I had some sandbags, and I'd be doing some biceps and push-ups and sit-ups. And I mean, it's quite funny.
Can you give the audience an idea of what your hut was? Because a hut sounds quite grand, but I know that it was a bit more simple.
My hut was homemade. It was grand. It probably had almost 6 years worth of sort of engineering intelligence going into my hut. But Melissa, my hut wasn't grand at all. It was it had to be low, had to be maybe belly button height, because anything particularly tall would create a strange shadow. And we often had surveillance airplanes above us, and sometimes we even had Arabs coming past on camels. And if my hut looked like a mound of grass, well, then the Arab on the camel would not pick me up as being a hut. And if it wasn't particularly tall, then it wouldn't create strange shadows, and then the surveillance airplanes would not see the strange shadow. Because whenever a plane came over, we would be told to hit the ground so you don't create a shadow. So it's not so much the item that they pick up, it's the shadow, this big black shape that the airplanes pick up. So it would be a low hut. I created it quite wide. There was a lot of engineering. I mean, I joke with you, but I don't actually joke with you. There was obviously a lot of time in the desert, and there was a lot of contemplation. Those summers were hot, so you really wanted to create the best shaped hut. So my hut would be low, it would be wide enough that I could lie there and do bench press flies, if you like. So maybe almost 1.5 meters wide, and it would be made out of grass. I would get four strong sticks from an acacia tree, which I became almost like the Saharan gardener, if you like. I used to walk around the camp when I was allowed to, and I'd take an axe and I'd go to an acacia tree and I'd start pruning and then get branches, and I try to find the perfect branch. I'd create my hut with the 4 pillars on the four edges. I then create a nice big roof structure, which had to be tight. And then I'd go and get roots from this acacia tree. They had these perfect, like dowel sticks, perfect roots, dead straight. And I'd go and get these thinner roots and I'd chop them into perfect, sort of like 1.5 meters lengths, and I'd use that across the roof. I'd then go with a spade, and I'd then go and collect grass from the Sahara, which was a bit of a trick. You had to dodge the horned vipers that were potentially sleeping in the grass. Come back, plaster up your hut, and the huts were great. I mean, if you had a lot of grass, it would be a cooler hut. But that generally was my hut.
Mm-hmm.
Make it waterproof.
You mentioned prayer earlier, and Anne Taylor wants to know: were you forced to convert, or was this part of your survival?
Okay, so I wasn't forced to convert. The guys asked me literally from day one. They asked us on day one, what was our religion? And I said, well, I'm Christian. The other 2 guys were atheists, and they could relate to me more than the other 2 guys, than the Swedish and the Dutch guy, because they would sit there and say, look, there's a moon. How can you not believe in God? Fortunately, I do believe in God, and fortunately, I do think that creation is absolutely amazing. So I already had an affinity, sort of like leaning towards religion. But from day 1, day 2, they started asking us if we knew about Islam, and they started punting Islam. And I chose to convert to Islam probably about 6 months in. Things were becoming particularly strange in the camp. I thought I was going to die. I mean, there were youngsters, there were teenagers walking past, calling names, spitting in the sand, and there were too many guns around, and I decided to convert, and it was a serious decision. It was not an easy decision, but we all have decisions to make in life, and it's important to know that my decision is my situation in the desert is no greater than anybody else's situation here in this world, in the real world. akhir kokib world, because we all have different tolerances of stress. We all have different coping mechanisms. And what I was going through there in the desert is no different to somebody here having a carjacking, or somebody dying of cancer, or somebody losing a job. All of our problems are very relevant. And I made a decision there. We all have to make decisions here. I made a decision there to convert to Islam. And it was probably the best decision that I made. It opened up so many doors for me. It allowed me to use my mind to actually understand the religion. It allowed me to learn how to speak Arabic. It allowed me to learn how to read the Quran, how to read and write. So much to the point where al-Qaeda, a lot of them were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, they hadn't been to school. They would come to me and they would bring their Quran and they'd say, please, can you write out one surat? And I would then write out things from the Quran in Arabic and give it to them, which is quite bizarre, actually, because, I mean, I had been Arab or Arabic. I had learned Arabic for like 3 months or 4 months at the stage, and they were getting me, such a foreigner, to write. It was bizarre, but it teaches you a lot. It teaches you actually how fortunate we are here in South Africa when we do have education. I mean, education is imperative. How fortunate we are to be able to learn how to read and write, because it almost puts you above other people just with ability, even if you don't understand the exact situation, like Arabic.
Totally. And the other thing that it did was it elevated you, in terms of, as a fellow Muslim, you were now not as under threat as when you were Christian, right?
Yeah. Look, within Islam, I didn't know at the time, but within Islam, it says, you cannot kill a Muslim, cannot harm a Muslim. And if a Muslim does harm a Muslim, they go into a very hot place in hell. So I didn't know at the time, but converting to Islam basically would have saved my life, I believe. But there are a lot of get out of jail clauses with this as well. If you do stuff against the religion, then there's obviously the Sharia, where you can get flogged or beaten or be stoned or whatever it is. Yeah.
Just to bring it back a little bit to the sort of lockdown situation that we're all experiencing, we are privileged enough, or many of us, to have access to books or maybe some TV or a streaming service, something like that. Or if you live with family or friends, you have the luxury of conversation, or maybe too much conversation. How did you stimulate your brain and keep busy? I mean, obviously you learned Arabic, but what else did you have?
So we didn't have much, I must tell you. We used to, when we used to change camps, we would literally go around the camp and picking up al-Qaeda's rubbish. And that really became my life. I became a professional rubbish picker-upper, and then I'll put that in my sack, and that became my stuff. Things that I would use to read, I used to go past a thing called a ma'una, which would be their larder. It would be a hole dug under a tree, and in there would be rice sacks, and there would be carton boxes, there'd be spaghetti, milk boxes, and I'd go there and I would take cardboard boxes, take one of the face covers of a cardboard box, and it was ideal if it was in Arabic and English, because then I would use that to try and learn Arabic. Spaghetti packets was generally in Arabic and French, or Arabic and English. Also, we had simple medication, but al-Qaeda would literally take the medication, take it out, and discard the box and discard the small little notepad inside. And I would go around and pick these things up, and that became my primary source of reading. And ideally, if the one side was Arabic and the one side was English, then I could start using it as a bit of a dictionary to try and cross-reference. And that was pretty much how one really got to learn words. There was one day, and it actually taught me a lot. I was in the Land Cruiser, and we opened up the cubby hole, and there was the Land Cruiser instruction manual. And we took it out and paged through it, and it was in French and in English. And I tell you, it would have been priceless. This book would have been literally priceless. I mean, 6 years with nothing. This book was literally priceless. I would have literally sold somebody for this book. And I took it and I asked the guy if I could borrow it, and he gave it to me. And I sat there, and this was my reading. I mean, this was so exciting. How does a clutch work? When you push the indicator, what actually takes place? This stuff was fascinating. I hadn't seen stuff like this in years. And I took it and I borrowed it for 2 weeks, and I was using this to learn a bit of French English. And then the guy, his name was Schweib, he came back and he then said, look, we're now changing camps. You must give me the book back. It's imperative we have this book back in the cubby hole. So I gave it back to this guy, and he put it in the cubby hole. He took it and off he went with it. And later on that afternoon, I saw the thing in a pit, and he had set fire to it. And he hadn't. The boss of the camp said, "Ugh, that's rubbish," and he just chucked it out. And
Oh.
and that, like I say, that was priceless. And I sat there thinking, gee whiz, McGown, you're an absolute idiot. You should have actually gone to the boss and said, "Can I keep this book?" Because the communication is terrible amongst Al-Qaeda. One guy thinks this is important. The boss thinks it's rubbish. That guy takes it. The boss chucks it out, sets fire to it. Now I've lost my encyclopedia of land cruisers. So, I mean, it's amazing how you learn. But you learn, when you haven't got much in the desert, I tell you, the smallest piece of generosity means the absolute world to you. If Al-Qaeda came and offered me something and smiled, I had nothing here. I had absolutely nothing. I literally had my bag of rubbish. And when they came and offered me stuff, those things, a gentle smile, or a kind word from Al-Qaeda would lift my spirits. And I think it was these things that made me appreciate the small things in life so enormously. And that book, a flippin' Land Cruiser instruction manual, was priceless. And it got taken from me.
And after that, the French dictionary. I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah. So Sue, my mother-in-law, she sent me a French dictionary into the desert, and this thing was also priceless. I mean, this was information. This was basically schooling grade 0 to matric the whole way through. For me, anyway, this was one book which was my entire schooling, and it was priceless, and it caused a lot of discord between fellow hostages. It's like that proverbial Coke bottle in The Gods Must Be Crazy that got chucked out of the window. It ended up being pretty much like that. We were all beating each other on the head with this thing. But there was a time when the French arrived in Mali and all of our stuff got confiscated, including that French dictionary. And this thing literally disappeared for about 2 years. And then it reappeared 2 years later, and then one could start sort of expanding one's mind again. But it was absolutely priceless, this book. It was incredible. It was incredible how you can hold on to small things like that when you have nothing.
Cool. Dion Nell wants you to comment on the concept of hope while incarcerated, because, I mean, in our current situation, we're hanging on to hope that there'll be a vaccine, hopefully in the next year or so. It could be longer. We have no idea how long we're going to have to wear masks or anything like that. And, surely in order to cope as a prisoner, to see an end to your ordeal, you had to have hope at some stage. And was hope useful, or after 6 years, was it a bugbear?
No, I tell you, I think us as humans, we tend to equilibrium. We don't want to die specifically, and even in the most dire times in the desert, suicide was still never an option there. We just tend to want to live. And having objectives and having hope is imperative. I mean, this is what allows you. This is what allows you to get out of bed in the morning. Otherwise, there were times in the desert that were very difficult, and I would want to just sort of lie under my blanket and just sort of sleep my day away. But you actually realize that this is not going to get you anywhere. And I believe if you do something, it's very easy to brainwash yourself and to become something just through repetition. I was seeing a strengths coach. And this lady came and said and wanted to talk about resilience and hope and what actually drives resilience. And she was saying she thought that she says, well, look, you must have been born with this. There's something that you were born with, resilience. It's a part of you, part of your DNA. And I suppose to a degree it must be, but I think we all have this inside us. But it's certainly possible to learn resilience, to learn how to be resilient, And this was something which was a daily effort for me. It's important. It's important to have goals and objectives. And I think what makes it, I think what is quite interesting in a goal and objectives is if you can have something emotional in that goal. Okay, for me it was to come home. My long-term goal was to come home. My short-term goal, my middle-term goal was to create a hut or to get some water or to survive, to kill the snake, to not have my head chopped off. And often, the short-term, medium-term goals were very much snaky. They went all over the show. And often I had to sort of bring them in and refocus them on the end objective to go home. But without hope, you don't have anything. And I used to try and sort of remind myself on a daily basis, because I say being around the hostages was a very negative environment. And if I just placed myself around them, I would have come out of the desert an absolute mess. If I came out at all, and if I came out a mess, then I would be sitting here being an absolute mess. And really, you get one chance at life. So you really have to try and pull things together and make the best of it if you want to get through till tomorrow. Hope is imperative. Yeah.
And I take it hope must have been a major factor in the rehab that you undertook, because you've told me that, you know, when you left London, or while you were in London, you were very depressed, that you were a shell of your former self as a teen or in your early 20s. You were a different person then to who you were in your 30s. And that part of going back to South Africa and this journey to Johannesburg on your bike, you were hoping to kind of clear your head. Now, when you were in the desert, you undertook your own form of rehab. Can you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you know, when I was a youngster, I used to be very passionate for the outdoors and for people, and you know, for positive stuff. And then I found that during my career, you know, I suppose sitting behind a desk for too long, I started to lose myself, and because of that, I wasn't really living my personality and living who I was. And I found that with time, I actually sort of my two paths, my reality and who I should have been, sort of separated. And when I was in the desert there, I realized I had X years. I mean, whatever X is going to be, I'm being kidnapped, however long X is going to be. And I sort of made a decision in the early days that if al-Qaeda weren't going to kill me, then I need to use this time to actually get myself back to being human and being solid. And this is one of the things that we now here in this COVID should actually be focusing on. I mean, like I say, if we don't come out of the end of this COVID actually knowing who we are and being able to sort of define ourselves, you know, in a couple of sentences, then we have truly wasted this time. Probably the biggest thing that came out of the desert, the biggest positive that came out of the desert, was that I had a time out. I had a sabbatical to be able to refigure out what was important for me. Because, you know, when I was a youngster, I loved the outdoors. I enjoyed bird watching. I enjoyed fishing. I enjoyed hiking. I enjoyed people. And I got to a place that when I was kidnapped in the beginning of the desert, I said to myself, look, all of these things that you used to enjoy, you seem to have lost touch with them. You know, a bird will fly past and there's no passion. But you know, when you were younger, that was what drove you. So what I used to do in the desert was I wrote down on a piece of paper and I redefined myself, taking my persona from when I was probably 18, 20 years old, before I started getting sort of ground down by life. And I said, you know, I enjoy the outdoors. I enjoy birds. I enjoy people. I enjoy laughing. I enjoy being friendly. I don't like being arrogant. I don't like being jealous. And this is who I actually am. That is the person I was 20 years ago. That is who I actually am. This person I am now is sort of not that same person. And I want to get back to being that person. A bird would fly past my hut and I would say, Steve, get up, look at the bird. And I'd get up and I'd look at the bird and I'd go, right, bird. And I'd sit down and that would be it. And every time a bird flew past my hut, I would do this. And I was trying to program myself. And within 6 months, I got up and I looked at a bird and I was like, wow, it's actually quite pretty. It's a black bird. It's got a white cap. It's got long, little, skinny black legs. It's got a like a hooked beak, so it eats insects. And I could start to see the beauty in these things again. And I tell you, it gave me a lot of joy because I started to refine myself and refine what was important. But also, I didn't, you know, I would speak positive things of myself. I mean, we really do become what we think, and this is the importance in an environment like this. When I sort of say, it's funny, you go to the shops and somebody's walking down the aisle and they pull a scowl at you and pull a face at you. They are programming themselves to become something different, something negative. And in a tough time, we really have to see the best in things. That person should be ignoring me having a conversation and be saying positive things and trying to make themselves, you know, work on enlightening themselves. So in the desert, there was lots to be angry about. Hey, there was lots to be grumpy about. I mean, these guys had stolen my freedom. They'd stolen my family. 6 years, no conversation with my wife, with my folks, with my sister. My sister had kids while I was in the desert. I didn't know about this. I come back and they're all this tall. It's ridiculous. There was so much to be angry about. But actually, it takes more work to try and find the good in things. It's easy just to throw away ugly comments at people. But to try and find the good in situations, it's difficult. It takes practice. But I tell you, once you've got it, it makes your life completely different. You know, tough times like this, I can see the good in the tough times like this. I mean, there are so many blessings to be had during this COVID-19. And if we waste this time, we may not get another chance like this to actually use this time to find ourselves, to become better people, to make a difference, to be generous, to help people, because so many guys are battling. So I used to really have like a mantra where I'd almost read stuff to myself on a daily basis to try and speak positive things over myself, to try and refine what was important to me.
And when you put that out into the world, that sort of positivity while you were captured, what was the response? We've got reader here, Steve Anderson, who wants to know how those who captured you interacted with you. Were you able to connect with them on a more human level? And, you know, I imagine if you were being positive as a prisoner, which sounds crazy, did it come back to you?
Positivity, I tell you, people like positive people. Hey, it makes you want to be around someone who is excited and happy. And if I found someone in the desert who was an excited, you know, a positive person, I used to try to place myself around them as well to try and take a bit of their energy. There was a lot of mind games in the desert, and distraction was amazing. I tell you, you know, guys would come to me and say to me, "You're going to go home soon," and I knew it was absolute rubbish, okay, because I'd heard this 1,000 times before this, and I was now 4 years into my captivity. But I would allow myself to sort of believe them because almost bluffing to myself that I was going to go home would almost give me a 2-week holiday. I could walk around camp like, look at me, I'm going home in 2 weeks' time. I am positive. Rather than having this deep oppression and this deep weight on top of me, I would allow myself to sort of be bluffed. So, you know, my positive attitude in the desert, I had a very different approach to Shark and to Johan.
Who are the Dutch and the Swedish guy?
Yeah. So Shark was the Dutch hostage. He was 15 years my senior, and then Johan was a Swedish hostage, and he was my age. He was about 3 or 4 months younger than me. I had a very different approach. Shark, for example, he was a very fun, friendly guy, but he also didn't want to be there, and he didn't want to get involved in absolutely anything because he was angry, and he would sometimes have these crazy outbursts where he would scream. And the one day he actually stood over me screaming in my face, saying to me, "Why are you being friendly with these guys? You know, they've taken your freedom, they've kidnapped you. Do you not understand? They've kidnapped you." And I remember saying to him, "Yeah, you know, Shark, I hear you. They have kidnapped me. They've taken my family. They've taken my freedom. They've taken everything that's important to me. But the minute I let them take me from me is the minute that they have actually won. And if I give my what I am to these guys, and I go home angry or changed, I'm the only person who's going to lose out. And off the back of that, my family are going to lose out. So I'm not allowed to help. I'm not allowing myself to do that." So Shark was angry that way. Johan, he just wanted to escape the whole time. He was also a little bit, in my opinion, he was a little bit arrogant, and he wanted to escape the whole time. So as far as the entire camp dynamics went, with me taking my approach to be friendly and positive with al-Qaeda to survive, I believe people are less likely to kill you if they get along with you. And I also didn't want to waste these 6 years. If I was angry and grumpy, I would have wasted 6 years. I would have come out of the desert and been able to say to you, "Tudor, I was kidnapped, I sat in a small hut, and I'm angry." That's my story, which would be a pretty boring story. At least I can come out and I can say, "Look, I learned to make rope out of grass. I learned how to milk a camel. I dug a well. I helped dig a well. You know, I slaughtered a goat, and I prepared the meat. I went hunting rabbits. I did all these things in the desert." And I did those things probably because I placed myself around al-Qaeda, and I tried not to look as though I was a risk, someone dangerous. And I try to throw energy at a situation. You get one life, live it, make the most of it, because when it's over, it's over. And I think it did allow me things in the desert, trying to maintain a positive attitude.
Amazing. Paul Bosman wants to know, after your ordeal, what is your view now of materialism and the sort of capitalist system that we all live in or find ourselves in? Has it changed a lot? Because I mean, you were out there, other than, you know, the odd change of clothes that they got you, you didn't have anything.
Yeah. I mean, I had very little. I had a rice sack, and in my rice sack, my empty rice sack, in that was my bits and pieces. You know, beforehand I was in banking, and I was earning decent money. And what I can say is, money didn't make me happy. You know, I ended up living purely for the cash. I would work, having lost myself, having, like I say, parted my personality from who I should have been. I ended up working, almost saying to myself, I'm going to work purely to provide money for the family, which is no way to live, actually. And then obviously I got kidnapped and had very little. And like I say, generosity from people is quite incredible, how when you can appreciate these small things in life, because it really is the small things in life that matter. It's not these big things, you know, it's not the fancy cars and the houses. It's the small things in life that matter, and generosity and helping people. It all boils down to people. I mean, Kath and I think we live a modest life. You know, I've got a nice bicycle, hence the arm. The bike doesn't ride for me, unfortunately. I've got a nice bicycle. I enjoy my exercise, but I always used to, in the UK, I used to say to Kath, what you can't fit in your rucksack, you probably shouldn't own, because it becomes clutter. The more you have, the more complicated your life becomes. The more you have, the more you have to insure. The more you have, the more you stand to lose, and the more complicated life becomes. Materialism isn't fantastic. If there's something that you enjoy, spend money on it. But just to hoard for the sake of hoarding is terrible. It gets you into debt, and it just raises your stress levels. And we don't do that. We don't live in debt. I mean, we try, if we buy something, we try pay cash, or debt for houses and stuff, but we don't have any debt. My wife and I are very, very fortunate at the moment in these current times.
Steve, talk to us about reintegration, something that was raised by Katinka Skuman. She wants to know, what it was like re-entering into normal life after your release. How did that?
Yeah, man, it was something, So I came out the actual day I was released, when I was handed from al-Qaeda across to the Malian Secret Service was on the 25th of July 2017. So I was held for exactly 5 years, 8 months, because I was kidnapped on the 25th of November and released 25th of July. Imagine locking yourself in your house. Literally, lock yourself in your house, close the curtains, close the door, chuck your wife or husband out and the kids out, bring in one or two strangers, turn off your TV, turn off your radio, switch off absolutely everything, turn off your lights. In fact, make a fire in the middle of your lounge for the evenings. Sleep outside under a tree in the garden. You can't go down to the shop at the end of the road because it doesn't exist. And and then 6 years later, today, open your front door and step out there and let's see what's changed. In the last 4 months, how much has changed, So there certainly were some very difficult times. When I came out in the end of July, I was back in SA in the August. I felt 100%. And I thought, well, I'm holding it together. I'm good. By the time I got to December, I looked back at the August and I thought, you know what? Now in December, I'm 100%. But August, you weren't actually 100%. I got to the January, I looked back at December and I thought, December, you thought you were 100%, but you weren't 100%. But now in January, you're 100%. And that went on like that, probably for the first sort of 6-8 months. And I can probably say it was only probably a year and a half after my release that I could start saying my mind was in a good place. And I now feel like I have properly integrated. But it was a lot of survival things, in the desert, everything was about survival. 6 years of surviving, 6 years. It wasn't 6 years of living, it was 6 years of surviving, if you like. And I came home and all my friends are talking about rugby and the fact that South Africa lost to Japan. And it's all very funny, but you know what, it's pretty, yeah.
That wasn't funny.
Well, okay, it's not funny. For me, it was all pretty irrelevant, actually. If you gave Japan a bunch of bats and you gave the Springboks a bunch of knives, well, now we're talking about a game, now we're talking life and death. But general rugby it was pointless. It was like, well, that's great. So I went to a lot of braais and a lot of gatherings with friends, and I would be the wallflower. I'd be the guy standing at the back there. I'd cut my hair, I'd shave my beard. My friends knew my friends knew who I was, but nobody else knew who I was. And we'd be standing in a circle talking. I'd be the quiet guy, and then somebody would pipe up, "Hey, this dude was kidnapped for 6 years." The guy on my left who had no idea from me, he would step back and go, "What? You are kidding me." And that would be the end of the conversation, because all of a sudden I became something from Mars that nobody could relate to, and everybody sat there with their mouths open looking at me. And I really required a normal environment to try reintegrate myself, treat me like what I needed was to be treated like I was just another guy in the room who had not had this experience, because my reality was running from surveillance planes and digging a well and, having bullets flying. That was my reality. So if I can hear what it's like to be South African, and we have a braai on Saturdays and Sundays we do this, and Thursdays we go for a drink at a thing, and, if I can sort of understand the normal routine, which is what I wanted to understand, what is it to be South African? That's what I needed. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And my mate, a very good friend of mine, passed a funny comment, because I said to him, "Hey, Rich, listen, I'm battling to find out what the hell is normal. What is normal back here?" And he said to me, "Steve, listen, whatever you do, don't compare yourself to us, because we're more screwed up than you are." And as funny as that is, it's quite profound, because there's a lot of people having depression, a lot of people having financial problems, a lot of people chasing things which are not important in life, a lot of confusion, not being able to pay school fees, living beyond your means. There's a lot of this. And it's quite strange that I get kidnapped for 6 years, but people in Joburg are in theory having it, inverted commas, worse. It's tragic. It's tragic. It is absolutely tragic.
It is. Steve, I've actually lost who asked the question here in the thread, so apologies to whoever you are. But someone asked a question related to what you just said about whether you view your experience as a blessing of sorts or a curse. I mean, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't wish it on anyone, but...
Yeah. So, okay, so let me just tell you now with this book that we're writing, al-Qaeda gave me a suggestion. They said we should, I was driving down to do a proof of life video in 2015, and I had this guy, his name was Mohammed. He was from Libya, and he was a big guy and a bit of a crazy guy. And he said to me, so when you go home, you make a book, you must make a book. And I was like, yes, I'll make a book. And I had this other guy, the other side of me, they both had their guns, and we're driving, talking about writing a book. And he said, you should call it al-Qaeda, Heaven or Hell. Was his topic, because he says, yeah, look at this now, we're driving to the river now to go and make a video for you, this is good. And I think what he was trying to say was, everybody's view of Islam and al-Qaeda is very negative, and then I was trying to see a flip side of the situation. So sorry, Tudor, that question, I started waffling there. That question was?
It was if you see it as a blessing or a curse, like if you can see part of it as a blessing.
Look, I believe this whole thing was God-driven. I was a Christian beforehand, and I'm currently between religions, but I certainly believe in God. And I believe I probably should have died while I was there in the desert, but I made it out. And I believe I could feel God's presence, and I could feel that there was a purpose and I should make it out. So, yeah, this is one of those tough questions you ask, because if I say no, I see it as a blessing, I could irritate a lot of people by saying, well, that's ridiculous. You were kidnapped by these crazy people with guns. How can it be a blessing? Your family went through hell, etc., and your mates went through anxiety. But what I can say is, if I'm absolutely honest with you, for starters, we can't change the past. Every situation should be used to learn something from. So while you guys were living in Joburg or Cape Town or wherever you guys are living, I was living in the Sahara. Problem was I didn't have conversation. Okay, so I just got I've lived in South Africa, I've lived in London, I've lived in the Sahara, I'm living back in Joburg. That is how my life is planned out. The one, I think I learned a lot in the desert, but the one thing I can't get my head around, and the one thing I battle with mostly, was my mom passed away 2 months before I was released. And to understand the pain and agony that my mother must have gone through for 5 years, 6 months before she passed away, that is something I battle to see the good in that. I can see good in many things that took place in the Sahara, but I'm unable to see why my mother had to go through such pain and difficulties and then pass away, and I didn't get to see her. 2 months later, I missed her by 2 months. And that's what I battle with. But yeah, look, life is life, eh? Life does what it does. It's the way we handle every day. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Steve, there's 2 more questions and 1 announcement on the poll. If anyone is watching and they want to vote on the book title, please take the poll. At the moment, the 6 years with al-Qaeda, the Steve McGown story is leading. The Desert Prisoner, the Steve McGown story, is a close second. And we have Tourist of War and Captive, both with the Steve McGown story after it. Steve, one of the questions that's been asked by many people, so I will concede, is are you still a Muslim? Many people want to know that.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not. I don't know what I am. Like I say, I'm between religions. If I were to, I see. I mean, I learned the religion incredibly well. I mean, I was taught by al-Qaeda, so I've learned a bit of an extreme version of the religion. But there are certainly within the Quran, there's certainly a lot of hikmah, which is called wisdom. There's a lot of things in the Quran which is quite fascinating, and it would be quite amazing now during this time of lockdown. There's a lot of generosity and looking after your neighbor. You have to feed your neighbor before you can eat yourself in the evening. You have to clothe your neighbor before, you have responsibility to people around you. So there's a lot of goodness amazing stuff in Islam. But I'm currently between religions. I believe in God, but I don't know what religion. I don't know what is the actual root. Yeah.
Right, Steve. Probably our last question with 5 minutes left. What is your advice for anyone struggling with the lockdown? You know, whether it's the fear of the virus, death, disease, depression, the loss of liberty, day-to-day monotony, or greater existential dread. What can you say to them?
I tell you, break your concerns down to the simplest level and try and figure out what it is in each problem that is actually concerning you, because then you can try and make sense of it. And once you can make sense of it, you can understand it, and then you can push forward. Live life simply. I would say that tough times do pass. You know, in a year's time, we're going to look back at this and say, well, it was something. But tough times do pass. So sometimes we've got to just sort of grit our teeth, push on, be simple, and get through it. Just push through it. And this is an opportunity. This time of COVID is really an opportunity to try and figure out who you are and what is important in life. And you have a responsibility to yourself to flip and hold, to hold things together. But you have a responsibility to your family to hold things together. So we can't just let it go and just fall around and say, poor me, I've got it tough, I can't cope. We have to cope. There's no other option. You either make it or you don't. So if we're going to get through, we just have to push forward. But the good news is that tough times do pass. And if you get through today, tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be better. There's so many blessings waiting for us tomorrow.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Right. We do have a couple more questions flying in, and I see we've got about 3 minutes left. So the one that has come through several times is around forgiveness. Sorry, I thought we were finishing off with that question, but is there an element of forgiveness to your captors?
I can't say I have any anger. So in a way, I don't really feel like I need to forgive because I don't have anything to forgive, to be honest. I don't think anger would help me. Anger wouldn't help my family. So if there were any problems from the past, look, either it's something I've still got to deal with and I haven't got there yet, and I'm actually just bluffing myself. But at the moment, there's no anger. There's nothing to forgive for the moment. I learned a lot from my time in the desert and took a lot of things away from my experience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Just see if there's one more question. Okay. No, we're gonna wrap it there on the questions. There are many other questions, and just to the audience, we saw them. We understand what you want to know about Stockholm Syndrome, food, religion, day-to-day stuff, greater geopolitical issues. So please buy the book, sign up to Maverick 451, and keep supporting great journalism and great stories. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Cheers. Thanks, Tudor.